And it's a distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Robert Hunt. Robert is no stranger to this club. I think over the years that I've known him, this might be his fifth or sixth appearance speaking at Rotary Club of Denver. Robert is on the faculty of Perkins School of Theology at SMU, and he has a fascinating background. And if you click on his bio on the rotograms, you can see it in detail, so I won't recount it here, but it's safe to say that his professional work has taken him all over the world. Interestingly enough, got to know Robert through the Rotary, through the White Rock Boat Club. And in fact, he was the Commodore that followed me. I can tell you he's a man of thought and a man of action. And the only thing I'm jealous about Robert, though, is that he's one heck of a lot better sailor than I am. So his topic today that we've asked him to speak on is how to maintain a civil society in an age of social distancing, in an age of COVID. And I can think of no better person to speak on that topic than Robert Hunt. So Robert, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Miles, and thanks for everybody. I feel like, having spoken to a lot of Rotary clubs and to your Rotary Club a few times, that talking about civil society to the Rotaries like carrying coals to Newcastle. You kind of are it. So, but I hope I can make some observations that'll be useful for the time that we live in right now. And because I'm a historian by training, I'm going to do some, and just remind everybody that the concept of civil society actually begins with Aristotle and the Greeks. And it comes through in Roman philosophy, political philosophy, with Cicero in particular.
On your belly.
It is the translation of the Greek and Latin words into the English civil society that gives us the term today. But although it has ancient roots, it really takes place, it's in the Enlightenment period, about, let's say 400 years ago, 300 years ago, that the concept of civil society really takes root in European political culture. And it's because it's a time in which political philosophers like John Locke and Hobbes and others are trying to figure out how you create a new society, one that is going to come after the society of medieval Europe or pre-modern Europe. And these political philosophers recognize that one important aspect of society is business in general. By this, they mean the old guilds, the medieval guilds, but they also mean the emerging corporations that make up part of the modern social world. The political philosophers also recognized that governments, which in their kings and governments and nobles, were another aspect of this of society as a whole. But what about everyone else? Well, in French political thought, there was talk about the third estate. The third estate was the church. So the church was its own distinct actor in society. But in England and the United States, the church was not so important because it had been officially disestablished in England, and we had separation of church and state in the United States. And more importantly, in dominantly Protestant countries, the church had become fragmented into competing Protestant sects. So in theory, at least, the church moved into the realm of the private rather than the public for these political philosophers. So what's left? Everybody else, right? What's not government and business? It's all the rest of us. And the term civil society became the name for all the individuals and organizations in a democratic society whose political behavior determines the shape of that society, right? In a democracy, civil society is everybody other than business and government who actually shapes politics. And when civil society is strong, the citizens control their own government and they shape the society to suit their interests. When civil society is weak, then these other interests rise up and can take control of the state on their own behalf. And we can see this happening historically. The founding fathers of the US understood very well the importance of civil society. And in fact, one way to read the First Amendment of the US Constitution is that it is foundational to the maintenance of civil society. I'm just going to read it for you. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, or the right of people to publicly assemble or to petition the government for redress of grievances. If you read through the work of the founding fathers, freedom of conscience or religious belief, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, and freedom to demand that the government keep its promises are the fundamental basis of civil society. These are the things that empower the people to act together in a democratic setting. Okay. However, what we need to realize is that freedom isn't the only thing necessary for civil society. And we almost might say that the Enlightenment philosophers took this for granted. What is equally important in civil society are constraints on public behavior that make it possible for individuals to work together. In other words, and this was understood, we can go back, I'll just pause for a second. I teach a course called The Human in Society at a doctoral level. It's a one-semester seminar. And so we actually read political thinkers, beginning with Confucius, the laws of Manu from the Hindu tradition, the Quran, the Talmud, the Torah, Christian scripture, the Greeks, the Romans, everything. One a week. My students hate it. Always, as far as written history is concerned, human written history, it has been understood that if people cannot discipline their own public behavior, they will become weak and fragmented and ultimately become the subject of tyrants and oligarchs. Fundamental to civil society is not just freedom, but the capacity of people to discipline their own behavior in public. So the big question of civil society is, how do you learn to discipline your own behavior? How do we learn to discipline our own behavior so we can work together to build up society as a whole? Okay. I think the Rotarians, you have a great example of this. You have your fourfold pledge, right? All of which can be read as, we promise to discipline ourselves in our public behavior so that we can work together and build up society. Okay. So institutions, whether they're businesses or government or church, impose standards of behavior on those who work in them. That's quite clear. I'm a United Methodist. Our official constitution is called the Book of Discipline. We're all for it, right? By the way, it's more preached than practiced, but I'm just saying, in theory at least, right? But that's these organizations. Civil society, which doesn't have an organization, civil society can only exist when citizens freely constrain their own behavior, when they discipline themselves. Civil society is based on self-discipline, okay? And as the title of this talk suggests, it's a difficult time, it seems, for self-discipline, in part because of what's called social distancing. So that's my introduction. And if there's any one takeaway, civil society depends on self-discipline. So let's talk a little bit about where that comes from. First of all, I think we need to remember that the term social distancing is really a false term. What social distancing means currently is physical distancing. It means creating barriers to face-to-face communication in order to protect ourselves from spreading the disease through face-to-face communication, okay? We're not socially distancing, we're physically distancing. We're still being social, by the way, okay? Now, the reason I say that it's important that we remember that what we're talking about really is physical distancing is because one of the key constraints on public behavior, one of the key sources of self-discipline is the presence of other human beings, okay? With the exception of some individuals, all of us possess in our brains neurons and circuits of neurons that are specifically designed to respond to facial expressions and tones of voices of our fellow human beings. And these neurons and circuits create a sense of empathy, a sense of having the same feelings. Scientists call these mirror neurons. They mirror within our own feelings, the feelings we read from other people, and that gives us a sense of empathy. Now, if you take away face-to-face interactions, then that sense of empathy begins to disappear. Those neurons really respond to human faces, okay? And as that sense of empathy disappears, our behavior becomes more and more selfish and quite possibly hurtful. Okay? The same capacity for empathy means that we are always watching how other people respond to us and mirroring in our own minds their response to us. So if we see that they're thinking we're fools, we feel like fools. And since most of us don't want to be made fools of in public, and this is a second important part of self-discipline, then we will tend to conform our behavior to the expectations of people around us. And that's an important part of self-discipline. We can probably see it as we look at all of ourselves. Well, I can't see most of you right now because my notes are covering you up. But all of us have, to some extent, dressed in a way that suggests that we notice that other people might be watching us, at least from the waist up, right? But I have to tell you, I've been in some Zoom meetings where it looked like someone didn't think about that. And I think we would all say that in a professional setting, that's not appropriate. We want our peers to think well of us, okay? The problem is, again, when physical distance intervenes, then this kind of self-discipline based on these neuronal circuits begins to dissipate. If we don't think people are watching us, then we are not careful about how we act and what we do. Now, I just want to mention, though, the good part about thinking about this as physical distance is that societies have always had to communicate over physical distances, right? And so, in fact, we have a thousands of year legacy of how to deal with this problem of communicating when physical distances take us away from face-to-face. But I'm going to return to that, okay? Because I want to add that our current situation isn't just caused by physical distancing, which we've had now for the last 10 or 12 weeks. The current situation we're living in now has actually been created over the whole last century in terms of what really are increasing social distances. And there's a few reasons for this. First, modern Americans work far too many hours in isolation. In one way, or no matter where they're physically present, in one way or another, they are isolated from each other. We change our jobs very frequently relative to other people, and therefore we don't socialize with the same people at work over an extended period of time. We move our residences very frequently, and so we don't have the same neighbors or neighborhoods that we've been in for decades and decades. And many of us spend far too many hours in front of a television set or other forms of screens instead of interacting with our neighbors or even our family. And I think probably some of you, maybe a few, not Miles for sure, but can remember a time when it was rare for a house to have one television set. I can remember seeing my first television set visiting a model home in a new suburban neighborhood with my parents. I didn't grow up with a television. We did have a radio. Color TV was even a bigger deal, okay? Now, it would be quite typical for the average American home to have more than one television set per room, okay? And we're not counting computers, iPads, and cell phones. And here I'll plead guilty. I'm sitting in my office. I currently have 3 different screens available to me, actually 5 different screens available to me. At home, I would have at least 7 in my office or I couldn't be able to think, or not think actually, okay? But the result of all this, okay, is that we are in fact more socially distant than we have been in the past. At the same time, we've experienced the fragmentation of mass media and we've experienced the rise of social media. And what these things do is they allow us to create new affinity groups that are based on the false intimacy found among people who agree with each other, but never look each other in the eye, right? I can surround myself with people who only agree with me, and I can only listen to the television news that agrees with me, and I can only watch television shows that are the kind I like, and I can only communicate by email, Facebook, et cetera, with people who are in my social group. So the result is that the size of our social groups have gotten bigger, but they are less diverse. They are less of an opportunity to practice civil discourse. And so as a result, we have lost our practice of being part of civil society. And for some, we've almost forgotten how civil society actually works, how you actually get together with people and make conversation that doesn't involve contentious political conflict or whatever, okay? Now, beyond this kind of social distancing that we have created for ourselves, there's a second problem that arrives specifically in relation to social media. And this is the rise of anonymity and the avatar, okay? When the home becomes a castle, surrounded by locked doors, shaded windows, privacy fences, entered through garage doors whose doors open and close automatically, it is quite possible for many of us to never know our neighbors and to live anonymous lives. I actually know the name of the woman who lives across the street from my house. I met her once 11 years ago. In 11 years, I have never seen her more than to see the garage door closing on her car. That's all. Literally have never seen her for 11 years. And I'm home fairly often. I ask my wife, who's home all the time these days, because she can't work in this situation. And she says, oh, never seen her. She's been working in the front yard in the garden every day for 10 weeks. We've never seen our neighbor. A white car pulls into the garage with shaded windows, pulls into the driveway. It must leave sometime in the morning, too early for me. Okay. So we've first of all begun to live anonymous lives. I don't know if some of you may remember that we used to have chain link fences. Your backyard was everybody's backyard. Well, that's gone. 7, 8 feet is what we want solid between us and our neighbors. But worse than this anonymous lives that we live is the rise of the avatar. The avatar is a substitute image of ourselves. It's a mask that hides our real selves from the people with whom we socialize. So they don't have to actually see us, or they don't even know who we are. I went through all my Facebook friends and I realized there's one person with whom I've had conversations, quite pleasant, by the way, but I have no idea if it's male or female. I really don't know. It uses the statue of an androgynous Hindu goddess, and the name is clearly false, okay? Now, this is really a problem, and I want to kind of explain why by referring to the work of Charles Taylor, a noted sociologist and philosopher. One of the things that Taylor is that European culture, and this could be extended to all cultures, but let's talk about European culture and specifically, which becomes American culture, by the way, has something called the masquerade. And we've all heard of this, the masquerade. The masquerade is the creation of a social space in which the identities of the participants are hidden, okay? So you have a masquerade ball, a masquerade party, Halloween, okay? But the masquerade in European and American culture is always associated with social chaos, okay? In Christian culture, old Catholic Christian culture, it was typically the period before Lent and after Epiphany, and it was called Carnival, Fashion, Mardi Gras, okay? And what is associated with is every form of normally bad social behavior. The masquerade, the Mardi Gras, is associated with excessive drinking, sensual displays, bad behavior between people of the opposite sex, lasciviousness, and on and on. That's what the masquerade is about. Now, I could give you a whole lecture on Taylor, I've got more than one, about what an important role this played in European society in the cycle of the seasons. But the point is, for us, that we need to realize is the masquerade was always a brief part of the year. 7 or 8 days, maybe 2 weeks. But the masquerade has become a permanent feature in our society, and especially in the forms of socializing that are digitally mediated. The use of avatars has put us in a perpetual state of social chaos, where bad behavior is constant because it's hidden behind a mask. Okay. So until earlier this year, when everything went belly up in March, okay, we kind of had two choices for socializing. We could meet people face to face and know exactly who we were meeting, and we could use our full set of human communication skills that we have inherited genetically and socially, and therefore create civil discourse and civil society. Or we could use digitally mediated communications and never be quite certain who was behind the mask. And the masks were and are, by the way, getting better and better. I've been experimenting with virtual 360-degree meeting rooms, one called AltSpace VR, which you use with Oculus 360 glasses, another called Spatial. Spatial is particularly interesting because it creates a lifelike avatar based on a photograph of your head. Now, so that you actually have your own head on top of a buff-looking body, in my case, okay? It's not gonna fool anybody, but we need to realize that we're getting there. And if anybody, whenever it opens up again, I urge you to go to North Park and try the Dreamscape experience, full 360 virtual reality experience, wearing this whole sort of suit things. It's amazing and it is very compelling. It's living in a world of avatars. Even video conferencing like we're doing now only helps a little with the anonymity and the avatars, because we've all been in a Zoom conference in the last 10 weeks where someone put up an avatar to essentially hide what they're doing from the other people in the conference. They mute their mic, they put up an avatar, and they're on Facebook, they're drinking coffee, who knows what they're doing, right? So even this sort of the Zoom meeting doesn't guarantee that we're representing ourselves. Back in 1973, Roger Daltrey of The Who sang a song that began, "Can you see the real me? Can you? Can you?" Okay. Today, the answer is probably not on social media. What I can see is your pet dog, your grandchild, Darth Vader, Princess Leia, the princess, what's her name from Frozen, or something else. Okay, I have an old friend, I know who he is, but what he displays is a picture of the backside of a rat with a cross through it. I'm not sure what it's supposed to represent. Okay, so in the end, what I want to say is it's not so much physical distance that is creating a problem in civil society. It is the social barriers such as isolation, anonymity, and the use of avatars that begin to weaken civil society to the point that we are in real danger of losing the freedoms that make democracy possible and which protect it from tyranny and oligarchy, or both. All that has changed with the COVID-19 crisis is that the residual physical contacts that are so important to civil society have now been curtailed. And they begin to make us conscious of what we've actually been losing for decades and decades. But we just didn't realize it till we were told we had to social distance. So to get to the question of the day, how are we going to maintain a civil society? And here's where I think we can go to a legacy, because civil society has always been maintained when physical distance has kept people from face-to-face communication. I think you could learn a lot actually by reading both, if you wanted to go back to real historical material, the writings of people 200 years ago or 300 years ago. But if you like a more fictional way, you can read the work of that deals with the Master and Commander series of books, right? Where you have this very formal, rigid shipboard life of the American and French, Spanish, and English navies. Here are people that were physically isolated from their homeland, even from the chain of command, not for days or weeks, but for years. And how did they then maintain civil society? How did they maintain touch, even over physical distance? Well, here's the thing, some things that I think we can learn. We can learn from people who used to only be able to write letters, right? The main way of communicating over physical distance back in the old day, like in 1984. Okay. So first of all, I think we have to do away with avatars and anonymity when we socialize via social media. I'll be very honest. A key concern with socializing from a distance was always knowing to whom you are speaking or whose work you are reading. Letters that were sealed with wax, the use of trusted messengers, passcodes, passwords, all of these things were essential to human communication when it could not be direct and face-to-face, because it established that I know the person whom I'm communicating with and they know me, okay? It's essential that we require that we speak directly and intimately only with those who we know and know about. That's, you know, back in the old day, the anonymous letter was rightly rejected as a credible basis for action, except in totalitarian societies, by the way. Any place that a person can make an anonymous complaint and have it acted on is already a socially degenerate society. There's a huge difference between protecting the real identity of a whistleblower, right? That's one thing. It's far different from allowing slander behind the mask of an anonymous avatar, okay? And I'll tell you what I do for my part. I simply do not friend or relate to anyone who doesn't give me their name, a picture of themselves, and enough information for me to identify them. Okay? And believe me, I get a lot of those invitations. A pretty typical one is a young woman who wants to be my Facebook friend, whose only other 4 friends are clueless members of my own faculty. And who is invariably a hairdresser in Florida that wants to become a model, and looks just like a picture I saw in a Walmart picture frame 3 weeks earlier. So I tend to just go, no, I don't think so, you know? And yet, absolutely not interested in your nude photos either, which is the first thing that pops up. Okay, yeah, I'm not gonna relate to those people, okay? Secondly, we need to introduce the kind of formality in communication. By the way, this is the big takeaway here. We need to introduce the formality in communication that characterized social life in early 20th century and before. We may not think of it this way, but formal communication actually protects us from emotional abuse. And by protecting us from emotional abuse, it makes civil discourse possible, right? I'm not going to stay involved in a conversation where I'm going to be abused. But I have to protect myself and I have to protect others by my behavior from that kind of abuse. So why? First of all, formal discourse establishes the respect we owe each other. Civil society is always hierarchical. It is never egalitarian. Formality simply recognizes this reality and establishes that every member of society has a respected place. You know, the reason my father insisted that I call everybody who was grown up Mr. So-and-so was so we understood there's a difference between an adult and a child, right? In many languages, German is a language that I speak fluently. We always make these distinctions because the language itself has built in the familiar and the formal. Malay, another language I speak very well, actually has 7 different grades of formality. So you're always trying to figure out exactly where you stand in relationship. But formality simply recognizes that everybody has a respected place. Everybody, okay? And you recognize that. Salutations in email need to get more formal and establish an atmosphere of mutual respect. Or in the case of close friends, they need to be more intimate so that they establish our common humanity. An email that begins with hi simultaneously establishes either a false informality while discouraging disrespect, or false intimacy, or it suggests that the person who's writing me doesn't know me well enough to respect me. I actually had a graduate student who wrote me an email that said, hey, Robert, I need information on this course you're offering. Scott. I didn't know this person at all. I'd never met him. So I wrote back and said, dear Scott, I don't know who you are, So I don't know how to answer your email. He wrote back and said, Bob, you run the GTE program. And then he signed himself at least Scott Jones. So I wrote back, Dear Mr. Jones, let's be clear. When you address a professor who may sit on your dissertation committee, you begin with Dear Dr. Hunt or Dear Professor Hunt, because I worked hard to earn those titles. And I like to see them used, Mr. Jones. Now, eventually, actually, he got kind of pissy about it, and I just quit writing him and thought, well, you are not going to make your way in the professional or academic world, right? It's not going to work because, in fact, you are not, your lack of respect is going to draw a lack of respect, okay? Secondly, the formality in addressing people establishes the respect we want to show our colleagues. In private, I call my colleagues by their first names. In public, and particularly in front of students, they are all Dr. So-and-so or Professor so-and-so. That's not just me being stiff. It's me being realistic about a real hierarchical relationship. You cannot fairly grade a student you also want to befriend. You don't give an F to a friend. You give an F to a subordinate. You don't give a raise or a demotion to a friend. You give them to a subordinate, okay? Formal language simply acknowledges the reality of our relationships and therefore establishes clear communications. That is the basis of civil discourse and civil society. If these things are all mixed up, it creates all sorts of wrong expectations that make it impossible for us to actually talk to each other. Similarly, having a formal language that excludes derogatory terms, curse words, bigoted references, and so on, ensures that we don't offend people who can't see that we're only joking, or who we may not even know. I'll tell you the thing that I fight with everybody here at Perkins. SMU's got this, but we don't here. Copy all. Copy all should be banned permanently from all business environments. You should never be allowed to reply all on a reply to anything if you're running a decent business or school. Because never has there been a quicker way to spread disinformation, dislike, hatred, etc., than reply all. Okay? Okay, sorry, that was my little rant here. But the reality is, most modern companies do have strict guidelines for communications, and it's not because they want to be PC. It's because they want to ensure that within the company, the discourse stays civil so that people can work with each other. Until very recently, this was actually true of politicians. Now, not so much. Such guidelines remain true in the military. They remain true in the civil service. They remain true actually in the church. Not so much in the university, okay? But all of this is hardly new. It's interesting, you can go back and find there were British regulations on the language to be used in formal correspondence that go back to the 16th century. The language of diplomacy goes back even further, because we cannot have a civil society if we do not have the discipline to maintain what in the old days was called a civil tongue. Name calling, innuendo, slander, curse words, derogatory references to people based on political affiliation, race, gender, physical appearance, handicaps, and age. All of those things destroy civil society because they destroy civil speech. And their use in public, by politicians, will destroy civil society, as certainly as we are here together, okay? I would only hope that the standards the Rotary Club has for its own internal discourse could be spread to the entire of our society, okay? Now, there's a third thing though, and this is new to our society. I've got actually a couple of PhD students working on these very problems. We need to be attentive to how our words are received across not only physical distances, but cultural distances. In businesses, it turns out it's common for there to be a branch of human resources dedicated to working out the formal language that can be used across cultural and generational divides. Because the business world, at least when the business is big enough to have the capacity, knows that civility is critical to profitability and the mission of the company. And if you can't figure out civility across a diverse company, then you're going to have a problem. Let me just give you one interesting example. I know I'm taking a little time, but I'm almost finished. One interesting example. I have a woman working on a doctorate with me, and she's studying the use of language in job descriptions across generations. And one of her interesting early findings is this, that job descriptions written by people of my generation that say something like, the company has an informal collegiate environment. Okay, sounds very good, right? But when she asked a group of millennial women to read these job descriptions, several of them flagged that and said, that means I can be sexually harassed at work. A completely different generational reading, right? What they read with congenial informal relations was a bunch of good old boys that I don't want to work with, okay? So we're gonna have to be conscious of this when we communicate across generations. I happen to have a millennial daughter. She helps to make me conscious of this without the respect that I would expect of my age, but still, sometimes we have to go there. Okay. Now, the rest of us have got to learn this lesson with regard to social media. A tweet, a Facebook post, a LinkedIn posting, an Instagram photo. All of these travel instantly beyond the closed culture of us to a wide, diverse world. If our use of social media is insensitive to cultural differences in communications, it will create offense, alienation, and contribute to the breakdown of civil society. One of the problems is that all social media is a megaphone. When you post in social media, you never know who's going to be listening and how far it's going to go. So we need to be careful about what we say. Fourth, those of us who really wish for civil discourse might consider staying in civil spaces among civil friends. An old friend of me reminded me once, if you wrestle with pigs, you're going to get muddy. Or as my mother said, you will know who you are by the friends you keep, and so do others. Okay, now I know that sounds really old school, but since then, I'll be honest, I've stayed away from Twitter. Twitter is the social equivalent of a group of drunken adolescent boys in a strip bar. If you're going to have a conversation on Twitter, it's likely to be interrupted or drowned out by someone you don't know and will never want to know. Or at least that's my Twitter. But then all 30 of my Twitter followers are apparently Russian hackers. I don't know. Maybe you can do better, but Twitter hasn't worked for me, okay? Facebook isn't quite so bad, but I'll be honest, every morning I look at my Facebook feed and I unfriend and unfollow anyone engaging in uncivil behavior, okay? Why would I want you as my Facebook friend when I would avoid you in real life? Why? There's no reason. Fifth, and this is my final thing, we need to get out more often and we need to leave behind our various screens. Here's the best thing about social distancing. All of a sudden, in my neighborhood, which is packed with young families, my wife and I are now like the oldest, really, in the neighborhood. All these families are stuck at home with their children. And as a result, they're getting out of the house as often as they possibly can. Okay, so suddenly for the first time in a decade, I'm actually seeing all my neighbors every day and can greet them from a safe distance. We do pass each other, you know, one sidewalk, someone in the middle of the street because there's no traffic. Okay, all of the yards are looking great. Why? Because we're all conscious that there are actually other human beings seeing our houses and yards. Instead of waiting for a visit from code enforcement because an anonymous neighbor reported us, we clean things up because we know that we actually have neighbors and they have children. It's actually delightful. I have to tell you, it's wonderful. It's like a paradise, all these little kids. You see, civil society is ultimately built in public. It's built in public places like restaurants, parks, museums, and the theater. Most of all, it's built in the neighborhood, which is the modern equivalent of the old village or the town. We do not need to physically rub shoulders with each other. We can stand 6 feet apart, right? That's very cultural, I want to add, by the way. I have Korean students. I can't even get them to come in the door to my office. If you tell them everybody needs to stand 6 feet apart, they go, thank heavens. No more of this get so close. On the other hand, I have a Brazilian student. I can't keep him on the other side of my desk. Every time he walks in, he wants to stand touching my shoulder while we talk about his grades. So I have to go, Felipe, you around there, okay? Yochun Park, you come in the door, right? Let's quit bowing. Yeah, but it's in public. We don't have to rub shoulders. It's in public. We can wear masks. That's okay too. But we need to be conscious that we occupy the same spaces as our fellow human beings. And we need to keep those spaces, whether they're physical spaces or virtual spaces, safe, clean, and healthy. That's the fundamental task of civil society. So in closing, groups like the Rotary, Sunday school classes, you're currently online. Here we are, video conferencing. But really, you know that you're just maintaining the relationships that were built face to face, right? Ultimately, however much we adapt age-old lessons for communicating across a distance, they're going to be only temporary substitutes for face-to-face encounters, assuming, of course, that in those encounters, we show that we value our fellow humans by maintaining a proper social distance that includes respectful language, respectful dress, respectful ways of interacting with each other. So thank you for listening. I'm happy to talk questions and stuff if you have time. I know I'm going a little over.
No, Dr. Hunt, thank you very, very much. That was a great program. You really, it's kind of, I personally now am thinking about when you were talking about how we address people with hi. I'm now about to go back, kind of modify my approach when I write via email and so forth. But I think we do have a few questions. Let's see. I know one thing that I had was now that we've all been locked up, in a sense, and restricted, what do you think people are going to be like? What's society going to be different? How's it going to be different as we start coming out? Are people still going to be afraid to get close? What do you foresee?
So I think that's a great question. I've been discussing it with a couple of my colleagues that come from different cultural backgrounds. I think that although it will take a little time, we will ultimately move back to the habits that our culture teaches us, okay? Everything I've seen that says, well, this will mean a permanent change, we won't shake hands anymore and that kind of thing, almost all of that comes from old wasps like me who never wanted to be that close anyway, right? We were never huggers, and we've just been waiting for the day when everybody would quit trying to hug us. So I think that's kind of fanciful, but those of us, I think we'll move back. Our deeply ingrained habits that our culture teaches are not going to disappear this quickly. And I think we saw that over Memorial Day weekend. People just went nuts. They couldn't be constrained anymore. Some of us will show a little more maturity, but I think we'll slip back into our old habits. So,
and that's okay. Hopefully, we've learned a few things as well. Let's see if there are some other questions here.
That's good.
I think that was all right. One question here. What's happened in Beijing and Hong Kong? How are those events tied into what you're thinking about society right now?
Okay, that's a really good question and probably would take us way off, but
that's a program in itself almost, yeah.
But I think real quickly, it's not hard to parse what is happening in China if we understand that every crisis is an opportunity for a regime to behave in ways that it couldn't behave in if the public was paying attention. With the world locked in a global pandemic, China clearly sees an opportunity now to crack down on independent Hong Kong. If the news reports in the paper are correct today, the United States has decided to facilitate that. I think what we're seeing is what always happens when people are politically distracted, which is everybody can begin to act up. And if we talk about a world civil society, when everybody's attention is diverted by something else, then someone begins to behave badly. Let's face it, the rise of totalitarian Japan, fascist Italy and Germany, the rise of Stalinist Soviet Union, all took place during the Great Depression. They took place at a time that the Western powers were absorbed with their own problems, and we weren't looking at Europe and Russia and Asia. So, yeah.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. Hunt. Glad you could join us. Look forward to having you in person in the future. So have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be with you guys.
Pleasure. Thank you. Okay. Ren is the Senior Global Market Strategist for Wells Fargo. And he's going to come speak to us next week. That's going to be an amazing program. We're going to get to hear hopefully some insight as to what the expectations as we start coming out of this, what it's going to be like. I think we've all seen, I think we kind of have concerns. What is our economy going to be like? How long is it going to take for us to get back on track? So it's going to be a great program. So come back and join us next week. I think we're going forward, we're going to do our best to do these programs via Zoom, because just with our speakers, it gives more interaction. We get to see people chat. So that's kind of the plan going forward. Some other remarks here, and I'll be quick. One of the things in Rotary feeds the need, well, let's see here. One thing I need to do is I need Brent going to talk about the golf tournament. Let me let Brent do that, then I'll jump into my stuff. Go ahead, Brent.
Yeah, real quick. We have been meeting as a group the last few months. We have raised nearly $40,000. So the team has been doing a tremendous job at reaching out to sponsors. But due to all of this stuff, we have made an executive decision. We're moving the golf tournament to the spring. We have a tentative date right now of May the 12th. It will be a Wednesday. And then going forward, it will be a spring tournament. So we heard you, SAV. It's awesome that we're going to be able to be spaced out between SAV and the golf tournament now. So we'll hopefully get more people to participate in both. So May the 12th tentatively, but we will update everyone as we get closer to signing that contract.
Thank you, Brent. They've done a great job. So, and it is for an incredibly good cause, both for Safer Dallas, Better Dallas, and for our foundation. So thank you, Brent. Thank you and Dana for all you're doing. Now it's that time for the 4-way test, the thing that Dr. Hunt was talking about. You know, that thing, if the world did this, it would be a better place. Of the things we think, say, and do. First, is it the truth?
It's the truth.
Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial
To all concerned.
And last but not least, will it be fun? Everybody take care, stay safe, and keep us informed what's going on. Thank you all. Everybody have a great day. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Good to see you, Dallas.